Hey, welcome back. It's the next episode of Stop Complaining, Work Harder. I named it that because as a manager, that's what you want to tell people to do, but in the government, you actually can't because they might get upset and complain, and frankly, you can get yourself in trouble by saying it, but it's what they really need to do. Every government employee that watches this video, please take my advice. Stop complaining, work harder. Finish your job, get the work done. All right, with that said, introduce myself. My name is Carey Davis. I was a civil servant, federal law enforcement officer for 20, well, a total of 33 years, 27 of which I was a federal law enforcement officer with the INS and then Customs and Border Protection. Finished out my career doing hazardous materials investigations for the Department of Transportation. Very excited to have retired recently, and I'm starting this series to give new government managers the opportunity to learn from my mistakes. There were many. I had some successes, lots of mistakes. That's how you get to where you need to be. So this is episode 2. We're going to talk about leadership and what it means today. But first I want to go over sort of the details of my career so you can see where I'm coming from, what I did, where I've been. Kind of get a better understanding of my experience. So I started out in 1992, believe it or not, as a GS5. For those of you not in government, that's pretty well as low as you can get. United States Immigration Inspector at the Port of Atlanta. That means I was the dude that stamped passports. Did that. Started out, believe it or not, as a part-time employee. They literally handed me a badge and a Smith & Wesson revolver and then said, you can't carry the revolver on duty, but you can do whatever you want off duty. And no training for the first year and a half. Just get out there and do what you do. And, the INS had some incredibly fantastic people. And in many instances was a great organization, but you can tell they ceased to exist for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones was they simply kind of did things at a level that wouldn't be acceptable in government today. So started doing that. After early 93, I became a full-time employee, immigration inspector. Went to ep2 at FLETC, that's the Immigration Officers Basic Training Course at FLETC. In late 93, IOBTC 154. If any of you other guys are out there, email me, ctd@whiskeyandguns.com. Haven't heard from most of you in a long time, so love to hear that. Love to hear where you're at now. So did several jobs: special operations inspector, senior inspector. Then I got my first management job in 1999. I became the chief of detention and removals for the INS's southern region, which basically means I managed all the illegal aliens that the INS had in custody, managed their detention, and in many cases release, and in most cases I assigned or completed the actual deportation myself, where we non-violent offenders, we take them and put them on a plane, and then the violent people we had to actually escort, we take them all over the world. Lots of issues with that job, not the least of which is I didn't know what the hell I was doing, both as a manager and as an officer. So had a steep learning curve, and we can have a long talk about that very short period of time in my life, but because it has some of the most interesting stories. But that said, in 2001, I was offered a job as a supervisory immigration inspector back at the airport. Best decision I ever made for a lot of reasons, but I didn't realize what those reasons were at the time. But got back to the airport, 9/11 happened. The nature of everything sort of changed very rapidly after that. In March 2003, we became CBP, so now as a supervisory CBP officer, and they made me what they called chief of the anti-terrorism contraband enforcement team in Atlanta. And interestingly enough, I had zero experience doing that, but I think the customs supervisors that sort of took over CBP at the time thought we couldn't handle it. But after dealing with people dealing with cargo is extremely simplistic. It's either got bad stuff in it or it doesn't. And that's not to say the job of clearing cargo is easy. It's very complex. International trade is a very complex environment. But the actual job of looking for contraband in cargo is pretty simple. You bust it open or you don't. You use non-invasive, non-intrusive technology such as X-rays or other systems, or you don't. So that was, and that was a small unit with 6 people, and they had a great work ethic. So it was kind of easy learning curve there. From there, I wound up as the customs attache in first Amsterdam, then The Hague, and got accredited as the attache to 6 more countries before I was done. 5 years later, came back as the watch commander, which is sort of GS-14, second in command, but I was the first one in the country at an airport. So I came back just after Mukhtalab, the underwear bomber, tried to blow up the Delta flight over Detroit, and so that it was determined, between me and my bosses that I would sort of lead all enforcement operations and any issues with bad guys coming on airplanes, which was a lot of fun. Got to meet and work with a lot of people doing that, and then suddenly one day I was then CBP sent me to the CBP Leadership Institute at the Booth School of Business in Chicago for a year. That was fantastic. Met some great people, and it was the best education I've received as a manager. And I stated in episode 1 that supervisor training in general for the government really sucks, and it does. It's awful. The experience in Chicago was fantastic. My understanding is that's changed quite a bit, and they do it in another place now. This is back in 2011, so it was a long time ago. But really, that's where I sort of got my real footing under me, is the difference between management and supervision and leadership at a high level. Came back from that, and then did a year-long detail in Washington running the Immigration Advisory Program, which is a bunch of officers overseas looking for bad guys before they get on the airplane. And then one day I was working out in the garden and got a phone call, and they said, "Hey, why don't you come up and be the Deputy Executive Director for Admissibility and Passenger Programs?" And talked to my wife, and we both agreed it'd be a good idea, so said yes. Went up there. That's how I got my GS-15. Not an easy thing to do in the government. GS-15s don't come around very often. So went up there. Within a few months, I was the acting executive director, and that job's responsible for the policy and operations for people crossing the United States border every day. It's still up there. The guy that occupies it's a great guy, but it's no small business. It's a big deal. So learned a lot after 3.5 years of doing that. They asked me to go be the director of international operations, so I became the second line supervisor for all the customs attaches around the world. So had 30 employees around the world, 2 in the office, and that was a big challenge. Had a great time doing it. Spent a short time as the acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner for International Affairs. And then in 2016, I went back to, I was asked to go back to Atlanta and be the port director. And that was probably one of the toughest challenges of my life, because it was the first time I dealt with unionized workforces before, but it was the first time I was sort of the principal I was the principal with a unionized workforce. And frankly, anyone from NTU that watches this, I give you guys great credit. You are tough as nails. And, with hindsight, I learned a lot from working with you guys, and it was a pleasure. If any officer from NTU wants to come on this show, I would love to interview you, because I didn't get to say it in episode 1, but anybody in management, anywhere in the government that deals with a unionized workforce, learn the collective bargaining agreement, or the CBA. If you don't know it like the back of your hand, you will lose every fight. You're a fool, because they're smarter than you. They know it. You better learn it. It's a good thing. Anyways, so after 3 years as the port director in Atlanta, kind of started looking elsewhere just to see what was out there, and saw a job with the Department of Transportation, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, a group that at the time I had never heard of, and nor had anyone else I knew. But they had an opening for the Deputy Associate Administrator to do Hazardous Materials Investigations in Atlanta, where I already was. And I said, I'll put in for that. 6 months go by, got a phone call, interviewed. The next thing you knew, I've got a job. So I left Customs after 27 years and went to PHMSA, and I spent the last 6 years of my career with PHMSA working with some incredible people, and I learned things that I never thought I would learn, but totally different culture, totally different way of looking at the world, much kinder and gentler as an agency, as a department even, and with a great mission, with a safety mission, and a noble mission, shall we say. It was a great time in my life. But when Doge and President Trump came up with the idea of deferred retirement program, and I was within a year of retiring anyway, I decided to take advantage of that. So here I am, a retired civil servant with, in my opinion, quite a bit of management experience in a broad range of subjects. So, I say all that so that you'll understand where I'm coming from when I say I've got experience. I've worked with a lot of people. I've had to deal with a lot of things. I had an employee murder his girlfriend. I've had, sadly, people pass away that worked for me. I've had people, I've had people get in shootings. I've had people commit crimes. And, on the other hand, I've watched people go from young and single to married with kids to grandkids, during the time I was doing it, all joyous occasions. And, one of the things that's interesting, we love to say our organization is like family, but your employees don't like to hear that because they know it's not family. They just want to go home at night to their family. So that's a kind of a little bit of advice I give to every new manager, and frankly to a lot of old managers too. Anytime you hear a supervisor or a senior leader say, we're like family here, half the people in the room at that very moment are thinking, no, we're really not. We're not like family even a little bit. So it's important to remember that. You can say it if you think you'll get points for it, but, and I've said it, I'll be the first one to tell you, and I will tell you, many of the organizations, PHMSA included, it was like being in a family because there was infighting, there was politics, there were people that wouldn't speak to each other, people that didn't like each other. But at the end of the day, they circle the wagons like nobody's business and get the job done. And so, there's ups and downs to everything, but I don't suggest using that phrase. So that's enough about me. Let's get on to the subject of today's talk, and that is leadership. And like I said yesterday, leadership, management, supervision, three different things. They all have commonalities. And you may have all three at the same time, you may have two at the same time, but generally they're traits. They're separate traits. They're certainly separate disciplines you have to learn. I will tell you my opinion. I was a pretty good leader. I was a fair manager, and I was just okay as a supervisor through most of my career. I learned, I got better at some, worse at others. Some jobs call for a little more intensity than others. Some groups you have to supervise very closely. Some groups you have to manage even more closely. A lot of times your staff is highly motivated and will be self-managing and self-supervising. If you get that, then you don't have to lead real hard, and that makes life really easy. And I know all this sounds confusing at first, but the more you do this as a supervisor, the more you grow as a supervisor, and the more you see. I think hearing this kind of brings it out. But the more stories I tell, and I'm going to try in each episode to kind of bring up an example of why this is. But first, I want to talk about leadership, and these are very basic things. People go to school for years. The military, spends millions and millions and millions of dollars to train people to be leaders, and leadership in the military is a very different thing. Obviously the concepts remain the same, but you also have the force of the UCMJ, where if you don't follow lawful orders, the consequences can be pretty bad. In the civil service, there's consequences for not following a word, but it's so difficult for managers to execute those consequences because of the bureaucracy surrounding everything, and Title V, and HR, and then counsel, and everybody else you got to deal with. The majority of time when people disobey orders in the civil service, if they get a slap on the hand, that's a lot, and they're very likely to receive nothing and maybe even get promoted down the line. So it makes it a very, very, very tough environment for managers. So leadership is extremely important. It's, to me, to be a supervisor or a senior leader in the U.S. government, in the civil service, leadership is paramount. It's the number one skill set you need. And if you don't have it, if you're a great supervisor, an okay manager, and a crappy leader, you're probably going to have a tough time. It's a fact. Leadership doesn't mean you have to be charismatic. Look at me. I am not charismatic even a little bit. Not good looking. Don't speak well. Hell, I can't remember which day of the week it is some days. So, and I'm disorganized in a horrible, horrible way. So I have to work on these things. I have to work on those things all the time. But the leadership bit comes a little more naturally to me because you got to be mission focused. So you know that you have to get from point A to point B. That's your mission. Whatever, however complex everything is in between, you have to get to the result. They call it results driven. Is the executive core qualification that they look for in senior executives in the government. So what's the result? The process in getting to the result in government is very important too. You have to learn how to follow the process. So you really do find leaders that are process oriented and results oriented. I believe that results oriented is more important, but you must keep in mind that the process is the only way you're going to get to the result and keep the result. Because what will happen is if you don't follow the process, or if you think you're going to get cute or smart or go around things, someone, probably a lawyer, is going to come along and tell you you did it wrong and take all of your success away from you. Trust me, I've done this. You don't want the lawyers to steal your success. They will. They will come along, and it may not be the lawyers themselves. It may be your boss who knows the lawyers are going to steal, and he comes along and says, yeah, you can't do that. No, you screwed up. Don't do that. Been there, done that. We'll tell stories at some point. But right now, let's stick to the idea of leadership. So there's two kinds of leadership, and one of them you get, and the other you have to master. The first one is the leadership based on your position. You're the supervisor. And there are a great number of people who will look to you and say, you're my supervisor, tell me what to do. Telling people what to do ain't leadership. It is not leadership. Never has been, never will be. It's management, supervision a little bit, but it's not leadership. Convincing people to do what you need to get done in the way you need to get it done and do it well, beyond expectations. That's leadership. Convincing people not just to do a job, but to do a job well because you asked them to. Not because you ordered them to, because you asked them to. This is hard. This is not an easy game to play in a situation where at any time they can tell you, go away, get bent. I'm not doing that. Or they'll just sandbag it, or they'll do a piss poor job. It is what it is. I can tell you, one of the proudest moments of my career, 33 years, COVID hit, the whole world scared, everyone sheltering in place. I had a Teams call with all of my staff, at the time 65 investigators and outreach folks, and I told them straight up, I said, this job requires a certain amount of courage. I expect that from you, and we're going to go out and continue to do our mission and keep the United States safe. We're going to keep pushing the safety mission and make sure that people are transporting hazardous materials safely. And I was clear with them. I said, look, if you've got a medical condition, if you've got a concern, you call me up and we'll find something we can let you do instead of going out there. And I had one person out of 65 call me and said, my wife's got diabetes and I'm just not comfortable going. And we found work for him, and that was fine. It's fair. And you got to be fair about these things. But everyone else, that entire unit went out and every day did their job. I had people in the private sector calling me up. What the hell are you people doing? How can you be outside? The whole world's locked down. The whole world's sheltering. Didn't matter. They went out and did it. I asked them to. That's why. And to me, that was the apex of their. It showed their commitment to their work, to their mission. And to me, it was the apex of leadership, because I didn't threaten them. I didn't yell at them. I didn't hammer them. I didn't give them written orders. I just said, hey, I explained what the deal was, and I told them, I really need you guys to go do this. And they did. And it's, again, it goes back to, that was the culmination of, at the time, about 30 years of experience doing this. Because I've gone and I've told people what to do. I've ordered people. I've threatened people. And the outcome is usually not great. Sometimes the outcome's terrible. But other times it's just not great. I'll give you a great leadership failure example. When I was a new supervisor, I worked with a guy, and he knew me and I knew him. We had been, journeymen together. And I said, go do this task. And he said, what if I don't? I said, then I'll write you up. And he jumped down my ass. Go ahead, write me up. I ain't doing it. I dare you. So I wrote him up. To this day, guy probably hates the air I breathe. That's fine. But the job never got done. I wound up in a legal quagmire. I wound up spending hours writing up the complaint about him, only to have him get it dismissed by the union anyway. So what did it matter? When I could have simply approached it in a different way and convinced him that getting that job done was in his best interest, which it was at the time. He just didn't see it that way, and he wanted to make sure I knew that he wasn't going to let me push him around. And so when I threatened him, of course I couldn't not follow through on the threat, but it wound up costing me hours and hours and hours of time and effort for nothing. So leadership's something you work on, and like I said, just because you got a title, people are going to follow you right up to the moment where your personal leadership fails, and then they'll never follow you again. I don't know how to get those two to add up with each other, but that's a fact. So very important. We'll delve into this more and more and more as time goes on, but leadership is partly about your position, but it's mostly about you. It's mostly about how you approach things, how you talk to people. One of the things about being a supervisor, and you'll learn this real quick, you can never be one of the fellas again. You can never be part of the crowd. You can joke, they'll treat you that way, but at the end of the day, you're still something they're not. And when the rubber meets the road, they will remind you of this every opportunity they get. So, they being your employees. So, think about that. So I want to close the day out with another bullshit bingo word. This is another great one because it kind of fits. Our word in the previous episode was robust. Robust is bullshit to the nth degree about let's make something stronger or better or more put together. They'll say, we're going to make this a robust package. Okay. Ooh, that was a very robust program. It sounds, and robust is kind of an old word now. This is from 10, 15 years ago, but people still use it. And again, this isn't about people being obsequious. This is about people who have a normal intellect trying to sound smarter than they are. That's where all these words come from. But the word for today is granular. Granular is one of my personal favorites. It's simply used to indicate we need more detail. So you're in a meeting and someone will say, well, that's a very robust sounding program, but I'm really going to have to get a little bit more granular on it in order to understand what's going through, how this process is going to work. And you say, granular? What the hell does that mean? Oh, it just means they want more detail. Okay, so, it's again, this has been in common use for a while, but it's just one of those things. You're walking down the street with your girlfriend or your wife or significant other, whatever, and you say, wow, that's a cool looking book. I wonder if the details are granular enough for it to explain the process. No, you don't say that. Say, I wonder if there's enough detail in that book for me to understand the process. See, that's what I mean. It's bullshit people make up to sound smarter than they are. Anyways, enjoy that. Use it if you want. I'm Carey Davis. This is Stop Complaining, Work Harder, Episode 2. You can find me you can contact me at ctd@whiskeyandguns.com. That's going to be at the bottom of the page here. And if you have suggestions, complaints, if you want to come on the show and be interviewed, send me your resume. Send me a list of the things you've done in management that people might be interested in hearing. And we'll get you on and have a conversation. If you just want to tell me a story or you need advice, shoot me an email and I'll do my best to answer it. Otherwise, have a great day. And from the Work Harder Studios, I'll see you next time.